Imagine this moment. London, September 21st, 2025. A quiet evening at Downing Street, yet history was being rewritten behind those black doors. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, without any dramatic speeches or media buildup, sat down at his desk, took out a sheet of paper, and wrote a letter. Just 300 carefully chosen words. Words that would flip over a century of British foreign policy, shock Israel, infuriate Washington, and leave Europe scrambling to respond. When morning came, the world had changed forever. The letter, addressed directly to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, declared something that Britain had avoided for more than 100 years. Palestine was officially recognized as a sovereign state. No gradual steps, no lengthy debates, just a sudden surgical strike of diplomacy. For decades, British leaders had danced around the issue, hiding behind talks of a two-state solution while avoiding any actual recognition. Starmer cut through that fog with the stroke of a pen. But what made this letter explosive wasn't just the recognition, it was the history it invoked. Starmer's words directly referenced the infamous Balfour Declaration of 1917, the colonial-era promise that gave hope of a Jewish homeland while disregarding the rights of Palestinians. That declaration planted the seeds of a conflict that has lasted more than a century. By bringing Balfour into his letter, Starmer wasn't just recognizing Palestine, he was admitting Britain's role in creating the mess in the first place. In one move, he accepted historical responsibility and pledged to act differently. It was bold, risky, and unprecedented. Reactions in Westminster were immediate and fierce. Conservative MPs erupted in outrage, calling it a betrayal of Britain's closest ally and a national security disaster. Their fury filled Parliament, with speeches warning of consequences that would haunt Britain for generations. Former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who himself presided over one of Britain's worst economic crashes, called it the most reckless foreign policy decision in modern British history. The establishment, for decades comfortable with the status quo, suddenly felt their world tilting. Meanwhile, inside Labour Party circles, it was celebration like never before. For years, the party's left wing had demanded Palestinian recognition, only to be branded as extremists and accused of anti-Semitism. Now, at last, their leader had delivered. Reports from Labour headquarters described scenes of pure jubilation: cheers, tears, champagne corks popping. For them, this was not just foreign policy, it was vindication. After decades of ridicule, they had their moment of triumph. But perhaps the biggest surprise came from the British public. Polls released within hours revealed that 58% of people actually supported the move. Far from the uproar that some had predicted, most ordinary Britons saw it as a reasonable step. Once it was explained that recognizing Palestine didn't mean opposing Israel's existence, but simply acknowledging Palestinian statehood, people understood. In fact, the simplicity of the move resonated. Why not recognize both people's right to live in dignity? The political class was divided, but on the streets of Britain, the majority quietly approved. Internationally, however, the storm was far more intense. Israel's reaction was volcanic. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recalled the Israeli ambassador to London within just 3 hours of the announcement, a speed that showed how deeply offended his government felt. In a furious statement, he accused Britain of rewarding terrorism and punishing democracy. His words were harsher than what Israel often uses against its regional rivals. To Israel, this was betrayal at the highest level. Yet beneath the anger, one fact remained: Israel had limited leverage against Britain. Trade and intelligence cooperation matter, yes, but it is Britain that holds the stronger hand. Beyond strong words, Netanyahu had little real power to retaliate. Across the Atlantic, Washington was no less furious. The State Department issued a carefully worded but unmistakably angry statement. While we respect the UK's sovereign right to make foreign policy decisions, we strongly disagree with the timing and approach. Translation: What on earth were you thinking, and why didn't you warn us? Behind closed doors, insiders described the mood in the Biden administration as one of shock and panic. After spending months trying to cool Middle East tensions, America's closest ally had just thrown fuel onto the fire. Congressional Republicans quickly called for reviews of intelligence sharing agreements, warning that Britain's decision had endangered the special relationship. For the first time in decades, Washington and London found themselves publicly at odds. Europe, too, was jolted. The EU had long been divided on the question of Palestinian recognition. Some nations, like Sweden and Ireland, leaned toward it, while Germany and France dragged their feet. But Britain's dramatic move forced the issue. Spain immediately announced it was reviewing its own position. Ireland welcomed Britain's courage. Even France admitted it might reassess its policy. Germany, as always, hedged its bets, releasing a statement so tangled it tried to please everyone while pleasing no one. The bottom line was clear: Europe could no longer dodge the question. In the Arab world, however, the response was electrifying. For decades, Arab states had listened to Western promises about peace while seeing no action. Suddenly, Britain, a major Western power, had broken ranks and acted. The results were immediate. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman announced £15 billion in new British investments. The United Arab Emirates followed with £8 billion in infrastructure commitments. Egypt opened talks on expanded cooperation at the Suez Canal. Qatar hinted at major new energy deals. To these nations, Britain had passed a critical test. It had finally shown it could back words with deeds. And this, perhaps, was Starmer's real calculation. Britain, post-Brexit, has been searching for new trade partners and new sources of investment. Freed from EU foreign policy, no longer obligated to follow America's lead on every issue, Britain now had space to act independently. By recognizing Palestine, Starmer didn't just make a moral statement, he made a strategic gamble. The Arab world, with its vast wealth and energy resources, represents an enormous opportunity for Britain's struggling post-Brexit economy. The move was as much about Britain's future prosperity as it was about historical justice. Still, the risks are huge. Britain may face strained intelligence ties with Israel, reduced cooperation from the United States, and political backlash at home. If the promised Arab investments do not materialize, Starmer could be left looking reckless rather than visionary. And if Palestinian leaders fail to deliver effective governance, recognition may become nothing more than a symbolic gesture. The gamble could pay off, or it could collapse in humiliation. For the Palestinians, this is their biggest diplomatic victory in decades. President Abbas hailed it as a historic moment of justice. But inside Palestinian leadership circles, they know the truth. Recognition brings new responsibility. Without strong institutions, without genuine reforms, without the ability to act as a real state, this victory could turn hollow. The world will now expect them to prove they are ready for sovereignty. And so, the world waits. Did Keir Starmer just make the boldest peace move in modern history? Or did he light a fuse that could explode in Britain's face? Is this the Suez Crisis all over again, reckless and doomed? Or is it the first real step toward a solution in decades? The answer may not come for months or even years, but one thing is certain: September 21st, 2025 has changed everything. The old rules of Middle East diplomacy are gone. A new chapter has begun, and Britain has written it with just 300 words. So now the question is not whether history was made, but what kind of history it will be. A turning point toward peace, or the beginning of fresh chaos? That will depend on what happens next, on Arab investments, on Palestinian leadership, on whether other Western nations follow Britain's lead, and on whether Israel and the United States can adapt to this new reality. The stakes could not be higher.